packaging deduction, the breakage deduction, the free goods deduction. I'm going to deal with one other deduction that's significant to artists as far as the payment of royalties and when their royalties are paid, and it is a reserve deduction, a deduction for reserves. What are reserves? Well, let's talk about the process, particularly in the physical CD world. Record companies sell CDs to retailers on a consignment basis. In other words, if those retailers don't sell the CDs, they have the right to return those CDs to the record company for credit to buy other CDs. In other words, when a record company sends out and sells a particular CD, they can send out 1,000 copies. They don't know if the retailer is going to sell 1,000. Suppose they only sell 600 out of the 1,000 for the artist. Now, they may not know for 2 years. Those records could stay in the store for 2 years. They may not know for 2 years actually how many of that particular CD that they sold. So theoretically, the record company has to account to the artist in 6 months saying that they sold 1,000 CDs and pay royalties for 1,000 CDs. And this is where it gets a little tricky. Record companies will say, all right, I'm going to show you what your royalties are for selling 1,000 CDs. And this is the amount of royalties that we owe you for selling 1,000 CDs. However, the record company is going to hold a certain percentage of those royalties in reserve for returns. So let's take an example of that. Let's say that they've shipped 1,000 albums. And if you're a 15-point artist, and the CDs have sold for the PPD or wholesale price of $7.50, you earn about $1.12 a record. Your royalties would be about $1,100. But the reserve provision says that they can withhold 25% of those royalties. In other words, about $250, $260 for a certain period of time, up to 2 years, to determine whether or not they're going to get any returns on those records. Now, here's the good thing about reserves. If you sell all 1,000, they will eventually account to you for the amounts that they've held in reserve. It usually happens 2 years after the fact, but at least if you're selling, you're going to get that amount. All right, so let's kind of summarize what we talked about. Royalties based on sale of recordings. Usually that's done by applying a royalty rate. The royalty rate could be between 13 to 16% of either the retail price in some contracts or the wholesale price, particularly in relation to major label contracts. And there are certain deductions or discounts taken from the royalties. What are the discounts that we talked about? The packaging deduction, the breakage deduction, the free goods deduction, reserves. Now let's talk about how recording contracts are evolving as we move into the digital age. Are those deductions relevant? The same deductions that were taken for physical copies of recordings, CDs, are they relevant to what's happening in the digital age? Well, I would say that there's a concern regarding whether or not they're relevant. Certainly the packaging deduction. Is there any packaging for a digital album? Yes, they do artwork, but there's no package for a digital download. As a matter of fact, at the turn of the century, as digital downloads were just starting to develop, not at the turn of the century, 2003, 2004, I had a conversation with a business affairs person at a major record label because I saw a packaging deduction in regards to digital downloads. I started laughing on the phone. I said, wait a minute. You have a packaging deduction for digital download. How do you have a package? That's ridiculous. And she said, well, once again, these are our policies and we have to have that in there. Let me make it up to you in another way. Packaging deductions clearly aren't relevant to digital downloads, and contracts have evolved over the past 10 years to remove that. Breakage deduction. Once again, major labels don't apply the breakage deduction. However, you might have an independent company or even your production company that you sign with that might release your product on iTunes. And if they have a breakage deduction in there, you're going to get paid on a lesser number than the albums or singles that were actually sold. So you really need to watch that. Can there be any breakage of a digital download? Absolutely not. The records are delivered in digital fashion to the digital distributor, and as they're sold, they come off their servers to the purchaser. Doesn't make sense. There's no breakage deduction in the digital world. What about free goods? In the physical world, yes, record companies did have to entice retailers to buy more copies by possibly giving them a few for free. Once again, in the digital world, the file is delivered to iTunes, to Amazon. When they're sold, the retailer or iTunes or Amazon isn't given any free copies. And what about reserves? The same argument. The file is delivered to the digital distributor who sells it directly to the consumer. There's no return of digital downloads. The digital distributor only accounts for the number that they actually sell. There's no reason for there to be any reserve provision. So once again, it isn't rocket science, but it is important if you're an artist to be aware of these provisions so that you can negotiate them in your favor. And if you're a record company owner in this new digital age, recognize that these are provisions that may not be relevant anymore, and you want to have a fair and equitable contract with your artists to move forward to develop your business.